Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 82 of Buha's Block. On today's episode, we're going to be covering Anthony Davis's abdominal injury and the fallout from that. Earlier today, the Lakers announced that AD underwent an MRI, and it was confirmed that he has an abdominal muscle strain, and he is returning to Los Angeles. He's going to miss the rest of the Lakers Grammy trip, and he is going to be reevaluated in approximately 1 week. And remember, with a reevaluation, that does not mean returning in a week. That means being reevaluated in a week. So most likely, it will probably extend beyond that. Maybe there's a chance he's back by the fourth game, which would technically be the 8-day mark. That would be actually the trade deadline, because today is Wednesday. The trade deadline is next Thursday, February 6th. But assume that AD will miss the next 4 games, and then depending on where things are at about a week from now, there will be an update in terms of his status. So we got a lot to touch on today. It's going to be a relatively short one. If you guys can't tell, I'm in a new hotel. I'm actually in New York. I did not make the trip to Washington. I will not be there for Lakers Wizards. Still will be covering it from my hotel room and going live after the game, but did not make the trip to Washington. We'll be in New York for about 5 days, which is nice. And then we'll, of course, be here for Saturday's game against the Knicks. But before we get started, you guys know the drill. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. All right, so the first question for me in the fallout of all this is, what is the impact of Anthony Davis being out? And I will keep this one short and sweet. The impact is the Lakers have not been a good team with Anthony Davis off of the floor this season. They are 2-1 in the 3 games that he has missed. But those 2 games are against Brooklyn, which they barely won that one, and against Portland, which that was one of their better shooting performances of the season. That was also one that was relatively close into the fourth quarter. Now, if you add the 2 games that AD left early and played fewer than 10 minutes in, that was against Golden State, and then this Philly loss that they just had, they're 3-2, and they lost to Philly, but they beat Golden State on Christmas. Remember, he played 7 minutes in the first quarter and then ended up leaving that one. So overall, they are 3-2 when AD plays 10 or fewer minutes in a game this season. But outside of the Christmas game, the other 2 wins were not particularly impressive. If anything, I mean, the Brooklyn game was, I would say, concerning at the time, but Portland game, it was kind of whatever. But Lakers have not been good with AD off the floor this season. Overall, per Cleaning the Glass, they have been outscored by 5.6 points per 100 possessions with AD off the floor this season. That includes the games he plays in when he's off the floor, also the games that he's missed. So minus 5.6 is that's a bad team. That's like a lottery level team from a net rating perspective. Now, looking at some of the different lineup combinations that JJ Redick could go to, like I assume Jackson Hayes will get the start. I assume they will lean on Christian Koloko, maybe Trey Jemison a little bit more, the two-way centers off of the bench. And then, of course, we will see some setterless lineups as JJ, once those guys struggle, because those guys are, borderline backup setters on like a good team, that he goes to the setterless lineups. And that's where things get a little scary for the Lakers based on the data. So looking at it, with Anthony Davis off the floor and Jackson Hayes on the floor this season, so Jackson as the primary center, the Lakers have been outscored by 3.6 points per 100 possessions. So better than the overall number of AD off of minus 5.6, but minus 3.6 is still not good. With AD off and Christian Koloko on, LA is actually plus 1.7, and it's almost a 400 possession sample size. So it's not like a giant sample size, but it's not tiny necessarily either. So what plus 1.7 is much better than minus 3.6. That's almost a 5.5 possession swing. Christian Koloko, someone that I think is all things considered played better than Jackson Hayes, and I would like to see him get some more time here because he is a better defender And I think he just does a better job of replicating some of the things AD can do defensively. Of course, he's not Anthony Davis. He's not close to being Anthony Davis, but compared to Jackson Hayes, he is a better drop coverage big. He's a better rim protector, paint protector, all that stuff. So I'd like to see Christian Koloko. I mean, really, if it was up to me, I would start Christian Koloko, and that would be the direction I would go. Realistically, I think Jackson's going to start. And if that is the case, I think there should be a quick hook, and Koloko should be the guy that they go to if Jackson is struggling with foul trouble, struggling defensively, etc. And then finally, AD off with Koloko off, with Jackson Hayes off, with Trey Jemison off, with Armel Traore off, all of the big men, or the centers, quote unquote, off. Those lineups, so the centerless lineups, that's LeBron at center, Rui at center, Vando at center, any combination of that, minus 10.8 points per 100 possessions. So those lineups have been absolutely destroyed. There have been a couple of games, a couple of matchups where those lineups have performed well, but on the whole of the season, those lineups have not been good. And my fear is that because the backup setters have largely been underwhelming, that JJ is going to lean into the centerless lineups, and those lineups have been even worse. Like, again, Jackson Hayes has been almost 7 points per 100 possessions better than the centerless lineup. So for as bad as it's been with Jackson, it's been far worse when the Lakers go super small. And again, I think it can be a weapon against certain teams, like Golden State, for example, because they don't have an imposing paint presence. I mean, you can go big and bash them, obviously, as LeBron and AD tend to do, but they're also a team you can get away with small ball, depending on who's out there. And that's where Jared Vanderbilt being available now gives the Lakers some more utility, flexibility in terms of the front court. And I think they are better equipped to play small in lineups of like Vando, DFS, and LeBron in the front court. But they got to be careful because, overall, those lineups have not done well. And my fear, if I'm the Lakers, is leaning into that, and that just not really working. The second question for me is who has to step up? And it's a long list of players. It's basically the entire roster because AD has been their best player this season. He's been their most impactful player. He's been the leading scorer, but he's also been far and away their best defender and their best interior defender outside of AD. They don't have a reliable, like high-level defensive rebounder and rim protector. I think Vando can ramp up to getting back to being the defensive rebounder that he has been in previous seasons. LeBron has had some really good rebounding games and defensive performances in that sense, but they don't have a guy who can do both things. Like even Koloko isn't a good defensive rebounder. Jackson Hayes is not a good defensive rebounder. Rui is not a good defensive rebounder or rim protector. So like they have limitations there with the rest of the front court. But if we're looking at guys specifically that have to step up, I think it starts with LeBron and Austin. This is going to put more on their plate in terms of scoring and playmaking. I think they're also going to need, of course, their big men to step up with the rim protection and on the defensive glass. And it's going to be a lot more on Hayes and Koloko, but even Vanderbilt, Dorian Finney-Smith, Rui, LeBron, all those guys have to do more defensively, more on the glass. And then I think someone else has to step up offensively aside from LeBron and Austin. And it could be a kind of night-to-night thing in terms of one guy having it going and being like that third or fourth option behind those guys. I look at a guy like Max, who has consistently been in double digits for about a month and a half now. Rui, of course, is capable of stepping up. Gabe has been shooting the ball better. Dalton has had some bigger performances off the bench recently. So someone in that group of 3, 4, maybe you could throw someone else in there, a Hayes or Koloko, whatever, because they're going to be playing more. Someone has to step up offensively and help out LeBron and Austin and provide. Like the Lakers have been an offense that has really been consolidated into LeBron, AD, and Austin, and then a bunch of defenders, and maybe one guy has a good shooting night or one guy gets out in transition a bit. Those guys chip in, but they've had a lot of performances where they only have 3 guys in double figures or maybe a fourth guy like barely getting there. And when you take away AD and that 26 points a night that he's averaging, like that's a huge chunk of the offense. It's almost a quarter of the offense. So they're going to have to, like LeBron could do a little bit more, Austin could do a little bit more, but they're still going to need someone else or a couple of guys, or again, maybe night to night, it's a case by case basis, like guys stepping up offensively to help carry the load that they're missing without Anthony Davis. Third question for me is, what is the schedule over the next week? So LA is currently 5th in the West at 26-19. They are 1 game back of Denver in the loss column for the number 4 spot. They are 1 game ahead of the Clippers in the loss column for the number 6 spot. And this is kind of a scary number when you look at how bunched up the West is. They're only 4 losses ahead of the number 12 Spurs. So that shows you, with a losing streak of 3, 4, 5 games in a row, potentially without AD, in like the worst case scenario, they could find themselves in that 10, 11, 12 mix with how jumbled and condensed the Western Conference is. Like all those teams are relatively close together. The Lakers have started to separate themselves from the rest of the conference. They've won 6 of 8. They have been playing better. The big wins over the Celtics and the Warriors. But with AD out, I think anything is possible in terms of results. Like we just saw, the Lakers about to play the Wizards. They just played the Wizards, and it was a relatively close game late into the third quarter, and even in the fourth quarter. I think it was single digits, around like 8 or 10 points, and then LA put their foot down and blew them out. But they've played Washington close and over the past season or so, and then like beyond that, it's the Knicks, it's the Clippers. So let's get into the schedule here. So the schedule for the next week, and I say week loosely because, again, that's AD has to be reevaluated in a week, or approximately a week. And I'm going to assume he's going to miss the trade deadline game against the Warriors on February 6th. So looking at the next 4 games: at Washington, at New York, at the Clippers, home against the Warriors. 3 of those games are going to be tough. Like Washington should be a game that you get a big LeBron 35, 12, and 8 performance. Austin drops 25 and 8. Max has 16, Rui has 17, 18, whatever combination you get offensively, that you get decent center play from Hayes and Koloko, and that, we'll see. You win the Washington game. Like, that's a team that's tanking. They're trying to get Cooper Flag. You still have a good chance to win that game. I assume they would be favored entering that game despite missing AD. But the Knicks, that's going to be a really tough game, even if AD was playing. That's a top 5 team in the league right now. That's a game the Lakers probably lose. Then at the Clippers, we saw they just got smoked with AD against the Clippers. They will always get up for playing the Lakers. I assume that's going to be a tough matchup as well. And then home versus the Warriors, without AD dominated Golden State earlier in this trip in Golden State or in San Francisco. And without him, I'm not sure what the status of Draymond's going to be for that game, but that could be a game where Golden State, we've seen, the Christmas game was close, but and LA ended up winning it. But it's one that could go kind of either way. LA is going to be at home, so you would think that they have a better shot. They perform much better at home. But I could see 2-2. I could also see 1-3. And to be honest, looking at it, I think 0-4 is more realistic than 4-0. And the Lakers cannot afford to lose 4 straight games, or I guess it would technically be 5 because they lost the Philly one. They can't afford to lose 5 straight games at this point of the season. Now, I do think they will beat Washington. I think they'll lose to the Knicks and the Clippers, and then I think it comes down to the Golden State game if they go 1-3 or 2-2. But again, that's assuming AD's back in a week, which there's no guarantee he is. So looking at the rest of the schedule, Lakers are coming up against the All-Star break. They only have 3 more games after those next 4 games, leading into next week with the reevaluation period. So after that, it's home versus Indy, home versus Utah, and at Utah to close out the pre-All-Star break schedule. Then they go into the All-Star break. So there's a chance AD just misses the next 7 games. I will say, that slate, not the toughest slate. So home versus Indy, I think they should have a shot, though I probably would favor Indy in that game, depending on who's available for them. Home versus Utah, they should win that one. At Utah, that'll probably be close, but I would still favor the Lakers. So let's just say they go 1-3 in that stretch of the next 4. Then 2-1, I would say, beat Utah twice in that stretch of the next 3. That gets you to 3-4, and it's not ideal, especially with, again, how close the West is right now. But 3-4, you're going to drop down the standings a bit, but you could still maybe be like a borderline playing versus playoff team. Maybe they're in that 6 to 8 range. The disaster scenario is going like 2-5, 1-6, something like that. All of a sudden now you're down at like 10, 11, 12, or in that mix, depending on how other teams perform in the West. Like that's where the danger zone is. So I think for the Lakers, if they can go again, they're kind of getting a break here in the sense that like if he just misses the next 7, let's say he misses 3 to 4 weeks. If he misses the next 7 games, they are going to have almost a week off, and like then they come back and play Charlotte, and they have that back-to-back coming out of the All-Star break because of the rescheduled game, because of the postponement due to the fires. So it does get a little tricky. I think they play Portland second night of a back-to-back, then they go to Denver. So that's where like second night of a back-to-back on the road, then going out to play Denver, things start to ramp up a bit, and then they have an absolutely brutal end of February into March. Like that 1 month stretch there is where like they're going to need AD back, but by that point. So they do get maybe a little bit of a break with the All-Star break around the corner in less than 2 weeks away, but it's still not an ideal time for AD to miss. This is also like you could flip that and make the counterpoint that because some of these games are theoretically easier outside of the Knicks and the Clippers, this is also a part of the schedule where the Lakers could have continued to pad wins and bank wins, and all of a sudden be, let's say, like go 5-2 or 6-1 in this stretch, and then all of a sudden, if you go 5-2, you are 31-21. Now you're 10 games above 500. You go 6-1, you are 32-20. Now you're 12 games above 500. So, like, it depends how you look at it. It could be a blessing for them that it's coming at a stretch where like they can kind of potentially withstand him being out. But it also comes at a stretch where like they were probably assuming we're going to continue this streak that we've been on, or this longer stretch of winning, and just continue to rise in the West standings and potentially position themselves to be the number 4 seed going into the All-Star break. And the fourth and final question for me is, how will this affect the Lakers at the trade deadline? And in my opinion, it shouldn't, at least in a negative sense. If anything, this should be the push that the front office should have already had, but now potentially has with AD out, to go get a better center that can complement Anthony Davis, that can play next to him, that can man second unit lineups defensively, and can shore up this position that has really been a position of need for this group dating back to 2021 with the revolving door of minimum, vet minimum center options. So, I mean, I think AD's comments put enough pressure and scrutiny on this whole situation and what was going to happen. And I talked about it last night on my Lakers-Sixers post-game reaction stream, and I wrote about it at The Athletic. This should be the sign that the center group is just not good enough right now. The fact that they couldn't beat the Sixers without Embiid, without Paul George, and really even make that a competitive game. Like the second AD went out, it just immediately became a blowout. And if AD has a more serious strain and has to miss 3 to 4 weeks, like this is a stretch that could determine the Lakers' seeding and ultimately their season. And that's why, so I'm going to be updating my trade targets and posting that episode later in the week, most likely on Friday, potentially tomorrow, but I find content does better on non-game days. Going to be moving around some of the big bed and putting them a little bit higher in my rankings. But I keep coming back to Walker Kessler and Miles Turner. And I know that neither player is an all-star, neither player is the sexiest name, but I just think with what the Lakers need and the window that they have here and just the way their assets are set up, I would strongly consider giving up both first-round picks for either player if it meant getting them and getting them at some point within the next week and staving off any other potential suitors. And I mean, you could also argue maybe first round pick and a swap and Dalton Connect or some combination of assets in there. Basically any other combination of assets that doesn't require both first round picks. But either way, I would make a strong, aggressive offer for either one of those, a stronger and more aggressive offer, especially in the Kessler case, than the Lakers have made up to this point. And to me, it just comes down to both guys can start next to Anthony Davis. Both guys can come off the bench. Both guys complement AD in a variety of ways. with Kessler, there's an element of him in the dunker spot and just roaming the baseline, offensive rebounds, lob threat, putbacks, hook shots, all that stuff. He's the best offensive rebounder in the NBA this season. Then defensively, he's one of the top 5 shot blocker, top 5 rim protector, defensive rebounding monster, and gives you that Twin Towers look defensively. Miles Turner is like a lab-grown big man complement for AD. Offensively, he's having a career year from 3, shooting over 39% on threes. So pick and pop big, catch and shoot, spot up, spacer who can give AD the space to roam around the elbows and the block and be a pick and roll guy with Turner on the weak side. And then defensively, similar to Kessler, not as good defensively as Kessler, actually a bit more mobile defensively than Kessler, also a good shot blocker and rim protector, not anywhere close to the offensive or defensive rebounder that Kessler is. There's actually a pretty big gap there. That's why ultimately I lean more toward Kessler. Then you also factor in age, contract, and cost-controlled situation with Kessler. Lakers could have him for the next 5 to 7 years, potentially, depending on how they structure the next contract. So I lean Kessler between the two, but I would strongly consider giving up both first-round picks for either one of them. And I know it's a steep price. I know it's not ideal, but you probably have 1.5 more seasons with LeBron and AD. Why not go for it? Like, what was the point of re-signing those guys and going down this path of positioning yourselves to keep assets, to find the player, to help maximize this window, and then ultimately not finding that player? And I thought the DFS trade was a shrewd move, and it has certainly made this team more playoff viable and just better. And you've seen the results. There's been some bumps in the road, but overall, they have been trending in the right direction with DFS. But now I think it's time to go out, get that defensive center that specifically can play next to LeBron and AD, shore up the front court, also step up and play 30 plus minutes a night when AD is out. Like Kessler and Turner are both averaging basically 30 minutes a night. They could step in and play even a little bit more for the Lakers, and LA then for the final 16 minutes a night, you can go Jackson Hayes, Christian Coloco, or even centerless or some combination of that. And it doesn't hurt you as much with having Kessler and Turner, or not both, but one or the other out there at the center spot. But as is always the case with the Lakers, things are going to be interesting over the next week leading into the deadline. That will do it for today's episode. It was a quick one. Just wanted to break down those 4 questions and get into some quick analysis about the AD situation. I will be back Thursday night after Lakers Wizards to stream and break down that game. And then I'll be back Friday morning with a new episode of Buha's Block with my final trade target rankings, a top 10. Again, going to be sliding some of those big bet up because I think that's a greater priority for this team right now. But we'll have strengths, weaknesses, how they fit, contract situation, and ultimately what I think would be a fair offer for the Lakers to make for each individual target. So be on the lookout for that. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back Thursday night. I will talk to you then.